After years of confinement and injustice, Daniel, a man life had broken in every possible way, walks out through the prison gates. The metallic clang of the gate closing behind him is, ironically, the first breath of freedom he's felt in a long time. But this freedom carries a dark weight. It's not the redemption he hoped for when he was wrongly convicted. No. Daniel is no longer the man who entered those cold cells. The world has changed, and so has he. Daniel's gaze, once full of hope and plans, is now cold and piercing. His eyes scan the landscape as he returns to the city he once called home. The streets, the people, the smell of the city. Everything seems familiar, yet foreign, as though he's a stranger in his own story. He's back with a purpose, and that purpose echoes in his mind like a bitter memory. Revenge. The truth must come to light, and he knows exactly where to find those who betrayed him, his former friends. Each step is weighed down by memories and resentment. Years ago, Daniel had complete trust in them. They had shared laughter, secrets, dreams, until betrayal unfolded like a silent poison, trapping him in a web of lies. He was the one chosen to pay for the crime he didn't commit, while his accomplices continued living freely. The atmosphere around him is dark, but something inside him burns brightly. A flame of justice, of revenge. He doesn't just want to expose the truth. He wants them all to feel the same pain he felt. He wants each of them to experience the bitter taste of betrayal that condemned him to a life of suffering and isolation. Now back in his hometown, Daniel knows the confrontation is inevitable. And this time, he'll be ready. The city in front of Daniel looks the same, but nothing in it sparks the comfort it once did. The narrow streets and old buildings, with their facades worn by time, seemed frozen, stuck in some kind of limbo, just as he had been for years. Yet something was different. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the weight of betrayal. But everything seemed to carry a hidden shadow, as if the city itself whispered secrets to the wind. The trees swayed gently with the rhythm of a cold breeze, but the chill Daniel felt came from within. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning every corner, every shop, as if searching for traces of a past that no longer existed. People passed him by, unknown and indifferent. The small town had always been like that. Everyone knew everything, but no one spoke a word. The faces that were once familiar now seemed distant, like figures from a forgotten dream. He knew that behind those seemingly peaceful facades were the same secrets that had destroyed his life. His friends, the ones who had handed him over to the police and moved on, were still trapped in this town, living under the guise of normalcy, pretending nothing had ever happened. Daniel's heart tightened. Everything here carried the emotional weight of a betrayal he couldn't and wouldn't forget. The town was the same, but its shadows, oh, those were more present than ever, wrapping around every corner, every glance that crossed his path. Entering the small house where he grew up, Daniel feels the weight of the years he spent away, and the walls seem narrower than before. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee greets him, but it doesn't bring the comfort it should. His younger brother, João, is sitting at the kitchen table with a mix of relief and concern on his face. João's eyes shine with a mixture of emotions, joy at seeing his brother free, but fear of what's to come. "You're back," João says, his voice hesitant. "I'm back," Daniel replies, his voice hoarse, heavy with memories and hurt. He pulls up a chair and sits across from his brother, unsure of how to begin. The tension in the air is palpable, as if the entire room is waiting for the next word. João lowered his gaze, fidgeting with a coffee cup. "I always knew you didn't do what they said, Daniel, but what are you going to do now?" Daniel let out a deep sigh, and the emotional scars he tried to hide began to surface. "I need the truth to come out, João. They betrayed me. All of them. And now it's time to settle the score." João shifted uneasily in his chair. "What if this ends badly? You've already been through so much, Daniel. I don't want to lose you again." The mix of anger and pain was visible in Daniel's eyes. "I have no choice, João. They stole years of my life. I can't let it end like this." João watched his brother in silence, feeling the weight of the difficult road ahead. Daniel searched through his brother's old room, the silence of the house echoing with forgotten memories. He was looking for any clue, something that could shed light on what really happened all those years ago. As he rummaged through an old drawer, his fingers brushed against something different, a yellowed envelope sealed with Pedro's name hastily scribbled on it. His heart raced. Pedro, his childhood friend, the one who had always been the quietest in the group. Daniel had never understood how he could remain silent while his life fell apart. With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began to read. Daniel. The first words were short, hesitant, as if Pedro didn't know where to begin. The text was filled with scratches and corrections, but the confession was there, raw and direct. Pedro described how he, along with the others, had been coerced by Luis, the leader of the group, into participating in the plan that led to Daniel's wrongful imprisonment. Luis had manipulated them all, ensuring that Daniel would take the fall for something he didn't do. The pain in those words was palpable, as if every line was a blow to Pedro's heart. He spoke of regret, of sleepless nights, haunted by guilt. But the most shocking revelation was in the final lines. If you're reading this, Daniel, I'm no longer here. I knew I didn't have the courage to tell you the truth in person. Luis, he was always the real culprit. He's the one who set it all up. Forgive me for not being strong enough to save you. Daniel stepped back, the words weighing on his mind like an unbearable burden. The anger burned in his chest, but there was also a deep sadness. In his last moments, Pedro had tried to do the right thing. But Luis was the true betrayer. With the letter in hand, Daniel knew that this piece of paper wasn't just a confession, it was the key to his revenge. Daniel ran into Anna by chance, on a gray afternoon, while she was shopping at the local grocery store. Time had not been kind to her. The once bright eyes now carried shadows, a reflection of the burden Luis had placed on her. He hesitated for a moment, but something pushed him to approach. Anna. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. She turned slowly, and for a second she seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to run or face the past he represented. Daniel. The word barely left her lips, filled with surprise and a hint of fear. They stood there in silence until Anna averted her gaze as if unable to bear the weight of the guilt and shame. You shouldn't be here, she murmured, but she didn't leave. Daniel approached carefully, like someone trying to wake another from a nightmare. He knew she was still trapped under Luis's control, and that this reunion carried risks. I know what he did, and I know that you do too. Anna swallowed hard, her eyes filled with a silent pain. Luis controls me, Daniel. I have no way out. Daniel realized then that Anna was more than just a victim. She was the missing piece of the puzzle. But if he involved her, he knew it could destroy her. And at the same time, he knew that the truth would only come to light if she stood by his side. The heavy silence of the room was broken only by the sound of Luis's shoes echoing on the marble floor as he walked confidently toward the leather armchair in the center. The power he had accumulated over the years was evident in every detail around him. The wealth, the influence, the way his gaze avoided any sign of weakness. Daniel. Luis said his name with a controlled calm, but behind that tranquility, there was something sharp, an unspoken threat. You know, when you were imprisoned, I thought that would solve the problem. But here we are again. Daniel stared at him without fear, though inside he felt the old heat of resentment bubbling up. This was the man who had destroyed his life, manipulating everyone around him to keep his hands clean while Daniel paid the price. Luis was even more dangerous now, with the power of the entire town in his grasp. I know what you did, Luis, Daniel said, crossing his arms. His voice was steady, but he spoke slowly, savoring each word, knowing it would make Luis second-guess himself. Pedro told me everything before he died. I have the letter. For a brief moment, Luis's smile faltered. He tried to regain his composure, but Daniel saw it. There was something different in his eyes now. The confidence was beginning to crack. You have nothing, Daniel. Nothing that can take me down from where I stand. And you should have learned by now not to challenge me. But Luis knew Daniel wasn't bluffing anymore. And the slight tremble in Luis's hand, once hidden in his pocket, told Daniel he could sense it too. Daniel stood by the window in João's house, fists clenched at his sides. The night wrapped the town like a heavy blanket, but he felt the urgency pulsing within him. There was no more time. "We need to act now," he said, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Anna sat at the table, visibly nervous. Her gaze was locked on Daniel, hesitant. She knew that getting further involved put her at greater risk of Luis finding out, but she also understood that this was their only chance to bring the truth to light. João, on the other hand, paced anxiously across the room. He trusted his brother. He always had. But the weight of the situation left him uneasy. "If we get caught," Anna began, her voice barely a whisper, but Daniel cut her off. "If we don't do this now, Luis will stay free and I'll never clear my name." He finally turned to face them. "João, I need you to get copies of the letter. We need evidence spread everywhere in case something goes wrong." "Anna," he looked directly into her eyes, "you know Luis's movements better than anyone. You're going to tell me exactly where he'll be tomorrow night." The room fell silent. João nodded, even though fear lingered in his expression. Anna, pale but resolute, lifted her gaze. There was no turning back now. Anna sat in the kitchen chair, her gaze distant, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel sat across from her, waiting for her to find the right words. The tension between them was thick, a heavy silence that filled the room. He already suspected there was more behind Pedro's death, but hearing it from Anna would be the final blow. "Daniel," she began, hesitant, her eyes welling up with tears. "Pedro tried to tell the truth. He tried to save you." Daniel's heart raced, every muscle in his body tensing as Anna's words fell like sharp knives. He knew what Luis had done to you. He tried to warn the authorities, to expose all the filth Luis was hiding. Anna paused, her hands covering her face. But Luis, he found out. Pedro didn't stand a chance. They made it look like an accident, but everyone in town knows they just pretend they don't. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. Everything he had suspected was right there in front of him, a raw, unbearable truth. Pedro, the one person who could have brought him justice, had been brutally silenced. He gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles turning white. "And you knew this the whole time?" His voice came out hoarse, heavy with anger and disbelief. Anna couldn't meet his eyes. "I was scared of what Luis would do to me if he knew I knew. I thought I could keep myself safe by staying quiet, but Pedro, he didn't deserve that." The hatred inside Daniel grew like an uncontrollable flame. Pedro's death now had a new meaning, a pain he couldn't ignore. Luis hadn't just stolen years from his life, he had also taken away the one true friend who tried to protect him. Now, more than ever, Daniel knew that only Luis's downfall would bring him peace. The abandoned warehouse was cloaked in shadows, the air thick and damp. Daniel stood at the center, feeling his heart race. The darkness around him mirrored the tension of the moment. João and Anna were positioned near the exit, ready to act if needed, while Luis and two of his henchmen emerged from the shadows. The leader, now wearing a cynical smile, appeared confident. Too confident for someone about to be exposed. "You really thought you could intimidate me with this ridiculous story?" Luis mocked, walking slowly toward Daniel. "No one's going to believe you. I'm the hero of this town now." Daniel stood firm, pulling a letter from the inside pocket of his jacket and holding it up. "This letter, written by Pedro, tells a very different story, Luis. Everything you did is in here. Your power ends today." Luis froze for a second, his eyes locked on the piece of paper that held his downfall. But he quickly regained his composure, signaling to his henchmen. "Get him." The two men rushed toward Daniel, but Anna acted swiftly, turning on the main warehouse lights, flooding the room with brightness and revealing the truth. Cameras had been set up, broadcasting everything live on the internet. The shock on Luis's face was unmistakable. "It's all being recorded, everyone already knows," Anna said, her voice steady. "It's over, Luis." In a fit of rage, Luis charged at Daniel, fists clenched, shouting. They collided violently, crashing to the floor with a thud. The sound of punches echoed through the warehouse as the henchman hesitated, realizing the situation had spiraled out of control. Daniel tasted the metallic flavor of blood in his mouth but refused to back down. This was the moment he had waited for all these years. Luis, furious and desperate, tried to choke him, his hands squeezing Daniel's neck with all his strength. But Daniel, with one final effort, broke free and landed a solid punch, knocking Luis to the ground. Both men lay there, exhausted and gasping for air, the warehouse reverberating with the aftermath of their fight. Luis looked at Daniel, his hatred now mixed with fear. He knew there was no escape. Pedro died trying to do the right thing. "I'm not going to die today, but you will pay for everything," Daniel said, his voice hoarse but filled with conviction. The sound of police sirens grew louder in the distance as the truth finally came to light, and Luis sank deeper into despair. Daniel sat on the cold warehouse floor, breathing heavily. Blood oozed from a deep wound on his side, the result of Luis's final strike before being taken down. His eyes, fixed on the empty space in front of him, reflected the whirlwind of emotions now swirling in his mind. The police sirens grew closer, but at that moment, time seemed to stand still. Everything he had wanted during those years in prison was now within reach. Revenge. Luis was finished, his image shattered by the truth that had been exposed, and Pedro's letter was the missing piece that would clear his name. So why did he feel so empty? Why didn't revenge satisfy him the way he had imagined? João rushed to his side, trying to stop the bleeding with trembling hands. "Hold on, Daniel, the police are coming." Daniel looked at his younger brother, the one person who had never doubted him. "I could end him once and for all, João. But would that make me just like him?" Doubt burned inside Daniel. He had planned everything to destroy Luis, but now that he had the chance, he stood at the edge of an emotional cliff. He could choose complete revenge or trust the justice system with the evidence in his hands. "Daniel, you've already won. You don't need to destroy yourself in the process," Anna said, stepping closer, her eyes filled with tears. With physical and emotional pain tightening around him, Daniel took a deep breath. The choice was his, and he knew that whatever decision he made would not only shape his future, but determine the kind of man he would become. Luis was taken away by the authorities, handcuffed and stripped of the power that had once ruled the entire town. His eyes, now hollow, stared at the ground as a crowd gathered, murmuring in shock. The evidence had been released. Pedro's letter, Anna and João's testimonies, and every detail exposing his crimes. The town, which once revered Luis as a powerful and untouchable figure, began to split. Some wondered how they had been deceived for so long, while others refused to believe it, clinging to their illusions. Daniel stood at a distance, watching everything unfold with a mix of relief and exhaustion. He had fought for years to reach this moment, to see the truth finally come out. But unlike what he had imagined, there was no euphoria or complete satisfaction. Luis's arrest didn't erase the scars he carried, nor the years of unjust suffering he had endured. The people around him whispered, some casting furtive glances in his direction, but Daniel no longer cared about what they thought. He wasn't seeking anyone's approval anymore. He didn't want to be seen as a hero, nor did he need public recognition. What he longed for now was something much simpler, yet harder to achieve: his inner peace. As Luis was led away to the cell Daniel himself should have been in years ago, he turned his back, ready to begin his true journey. The morning sun lit up the road ahead of Daniel as he walked away from the city that had once been all he knew. Each step felt lighter, though the scars of everything he had been through were still etched in his soul. He carried nothing with him but his memories, and paradoxically that was all he needed. The city, with its secrets and betrayals, was left behind. The streets that had once imprisoned him were now in his rearview mirror, and he no longer felt the need for revenge or to explain his story to anyone who would listen. The truth had been revealed, not just to others but more importantly to himself. The walk was more symbolic than physical. Daniel didn't know exactly where he was going, but that no longer mattered. The weight of clearing his name had dissolved, and his desire for revenge had turned into a quest for peace. He understood that his past would always follow him, but no longer as a suffocating shadow. Now it was merely a reminder of his strength. As the horizon opened up before him, the sense of freedom grew. The silence of the road was no longer oppressive. It was the soundtrack of a new beginning. Daniel smiled softly, feeling for the first time in a long while that the future was in his own hands. His journey had ended, but his life was finally beginning. As Daniel walked through his new home, a simple place far from everything he had known, the soft sound of a car stopping in the distance caught his attention. A small cloud of dust rose up on the road and he grew curious. Moments later, a mailman approached, holding an envelope. "For you," said the man with a slight nod before leaving. Daniel looked at the envelope with no return address, feeling a chill that made him hesitate for a moment. As he opened the letter, his eyes fixed on the few words written. "There's more than you realize. Pedro's death was just the beginning." Daniel froze. The world around him seemed to stop for an instant as he absorbed what those words implied. He had thought everything was over, that his quest for justice had finally set him free. But now a new mystery was emerging from the shadows he believed he had left behind. The paper trembled in his hands, not out of fear, but from a mix of unease and the spark that still burned within him. Someone knew more, and that someone was ready to reveal even deeper secrets. Daniel took a deep breath, looking toward the horizon once again. He had found peace, but maybe this wasn't the end just yet. Once again, the past was calling him, promising answers to questions he didn't even know he had. Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.